Hello, everyone. This is Johnnie Alexander. I'm so excited to welcome you to another edition of Novelists Unwind. My guest today is Curt Iles, and it's always fun. The inspirational market is full of women authors, and I always love when we have a gentleman join us on Novelists Unwind and get that male perspective. That's always cool. Just to tell you a little bit about how Curt and I met, because that's kind of a fun story.
Yes.
We were both finalists for the American Christian Fiction Genesis contest in the historical category. I think was it 2011?
Probably so.
Yeah, 2011. And I did not make it to the conference and the banquet and the awards ceremony, but Curt was there and the other finalist was there, and they sat together. And I did have the privilege of winning, but Curt was so kind, and he reached out to me afterwards, and we exchanged our stories. And I think I emailed him at the time and said, there were 3 judges, women judges, and if there had been a guy judge on that panel, I think he would have beat me and been the winner. His writing just blew me away, and it's just wonderful. Curt, tell us a little bit about your heritage, because your heritage is what drives your stories, and then we're going to share some of your most recent work. So yeah.
Well, like you, I'm a Southern writer, but I'm more than just a Southern writer. I'm a Louisiana writer. Louisiana, and of course, you can say Louisiana 8 different ways. But my family has been in Western Louisiana for 200 years.
Wow.
They arrived here, and the reason I say that, some with pride, but also with humility, is the area they settled, Western Louisiana, was a no man's land. It was called the Outlaw Strip.
Oh, wow.
It's where there was no government, no army, and they tried to keep people out. And so the early inhabitants of Western Louisiana, they were either running from the law or just wanted to be left alone. So, nearly every branch of my dad's family got here during that time period from all over the United States and Europe. And the thing they had in common, they really just didn't want to be told what to do. And it's still a trait of Western Louisiana. And so anyway, I grew up, I knew my great-grandparents very well, who were both born in the 1880s. And I was the kid that sat by the fireplace on the floor listening to all the stories. And so I started journaling. One of my uncles gave me a journaling when I was a high school senior. He said, write about your life. And so I started writing down everything that's going on, but I also started writing down those stories I've been told. And from that, my first books were all nonfiction short stories. You probably remember some of them. Mm-hmm. And they were a collection. Many of them were stories from my heritage that I told. But the thing that all my books have in common is they're about Louisiana. They say, write about what you know. So I write about Louisiana. Another reason is there's a lot written about Louisiana, about the cotton country, the Cajun country, New Orleans. But my part of Louisiana, which is Piney Woods, very rural, completely different personality and culture. And it's underrepresented in historical records. So that's why I switched to novels. I felt like there were stories that need to be told about my part of Louisiana, and I found that a novel is the best way to tell this story.
It is. Well, and I saw on your website that one of the things you say is that, and I actually even wrote it down, the shortest distance between the truth and the human heart is a story.
Oh, that's it.
I love that.
That's by Anthony DeMello, and I think it is so true. I come from a culture of storytellers. Part of our culture in Western Louisiana. I mean, I know some folks that are 10 times the storytellers I am, but we understand the importance of stories, and we collect stories. And what's neat, because I've written 13 books, Johnnie, and I speak, nearly probably 4 or 5 times a month, people come up and tell me their stories. And I never have to come up with another plot idea the rest of my life. They've told them to me.
And I love that. I mean, I love that. Yeah, that you just have been able to just take this one little corner of the world and just really dig deep, and it is your own, because it is, you're great
Yes.
great grandfather, or probably further even back.
I mean, the other day I took one of my grandsons and we cleaned the graves of his 5 times great grandparents.
Yes.
And there's not very many people that can go back that far. I'm
No.
very fortunate to have grown up in this area. That's such a unique thing. Another thing about everybody bringing their stories to me, you cannot make up a story that's better than the truth.
It's true.
Now, we novelists, we embellish it. We embellish it. But I had people tell me stories. For instance, the book we're going to talk about, Spent Bullet.
Yeah.
People are telling me stories about that time. I could write another book and never use one thing from the old book.
And don't you ever find yourself thinking, that is such an amazing, and it's a true story. It's a truth. And you're thinking, I can't even write that because no one would believe it. I can't put that in my story. No one
would believe it.
No, because it's so incredible. That's cool. But yeah, a Spent Bullet. This is, Curt, I think it's your latest, or
No,
it's the latest, right?
Yeah, this is my latest. As the Crow Flies was released recently.
Yeah.
And it's actually the third in what's called the Westport Trilogy. I have a book, The Wayfaring Stranger, followed by A Good Place, and As a Crow Flies, and they're the Westport Trilogy. Now, A Spent Bullet jumps ahead, and I'm going to tell you why. And in between, hold up As the Crow Flies, if you will, with the other.
Got you.
And now hold up The Spent Bullet too. I'm writing between these, I'm writing the novel that connects these two.
Oh, are you really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And what's fun about that, I'm taking the characters from As the Crow Flies. They're now adults, and their children are the main characters, and then their children will be the adults in The Spent Bullet. So I'm tying 2 unrelated books together, and it's really fun plotting it out.
I bet that's really cool. You can do that. Well, let's talk a little bit about A Spent Bullet really quick.
Yeah.
Because I read this, so I'm familiar with this story. I want to know about the cover. Now, did you design this cover? Are these like items that you have that are yours?
Yeah. I had some help design and cover, but you can see the pictures, the dog tags. My dad was a metal detector man. Now, my dad is the reason this book was written. In 1941, this book is about the Louisiana Army maneuvers in 1941.
Which I knew nothing about. Yeah. So this was like, oh, wow, what amazing history.
I mean, it's amazing times. 3 months before Pearl Harbor, no one knows it's coming.
Right.
And they brought in half the United States Army, 500,000 soldiers. And the purpose was to start training our army to fight in Europe. We had no idea we were going to be fighting the Japanese.
Right.
And they chose Western Louisiana because the land was open. It was a lot like Belgium and France, and it was a lot of national forests, so they wouldn't have to get a lot of land rights. And so in September 1941, they fought these 2 huge war games between the Blue Army and the Red Army. My dad in 1941 was 7 years old, and he spent all his time with these soldiers. And I grew up hearing all the stories about the soldiers, and anyone that was of that age, in other words, these are people now who are in their 80s. They were really affected by the soldiers because they'd never seen people from other parts of the country. And in many cases, friendships broke out. And of course, with The Spent Bullet, more than friendship breaks out, romance breaks out. I cannot tell you in my home church how many couples there are, and many of them have passed on now, that the man was a soldier. He came to Louisiana, and he met a Louisiana girl. And the premise of A Spent Bullet is Harry Miller is a Wisconsin soldier who hates Louisiana. People, when they first come to Louisiana with our humidity, heat, mosquitoes, they hate it at first. And he hates Louisiana and hates being a soldier. And Elizabeth Reed is a school teacher. Now, I don't know about your culture, but in the 1940s, elementary teachers did not marry. They were required to stay single. So Elizabeth has resigned herself to being a single school teacher the rest of her life. And so this book is how what we plan doesn't always happen. And it's the unlikely story of these 2 unlikely friends
Yeah.
coming together, and I don't want to do a spoiler
I
alert.
know it's hard not to do the spoilers, but yeah.
But I was going to tell you about the dog tags. My
Yeah.
dad was the inspiration for that. And I wish my dad had lived long enough to see this book. He would have loved it. But he was a metal detector man, and he went to an old Army base, Camp Claiborne, and he found the spot where the soldiers would crawl under live fire, under barbed wire. And so he took his metal detector and found coins and all kinds of objects. But he found these 9 dog tags. And I chose one of them, the name of Harold Miller. You can see it's on the dog tag right above the guy. I chose that as the main character of the book. And I made up the squad. I chose the 32nd Division. It was a Wisconsin, Michigan National Guard group that's down here. I chose the squad. I used the dog tags as the names of the main squad characters. And so one day I want to go to each one of those towns where those dog tags are from and return them to the families.
Oh,
I've returned a few.
Yeah.
It's been real hard to find them, but I want to go physically and see if I can find someone that's from those families, return that dog tag that was lost in probably 1941.
You said you have returned some?
I've returned 2.
Wow.
And in both cases, the soldier was dead. He had already died. You got to remember, if a soldier was here in 1941, they would be over 100.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
So, but anyway, I want to, and most of the dog tags are in the South or Southeast. I'd like to just make and of course, rewriters, I think it'd make a neat book.
It would make a wonderful story. Absolutely. It absolutely would. Another thing I really liked about The Spent Bullet, too, was it is so steeped in this Louisiana heritage and, just all these things. Like, and, I grew up in Ohio. My roots are Southern Ohio. And so a lot of Southern things we were kind of familiar with, but you have come up with sayings that I have never heard in my life. Like every tub sits on its own bottom. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is a new one on me. So that, it's so steeped in it. And yet then you have, which is really cool, you have Harry, who's from Wisconsin, and then you have these other soldiers from Idaho, was it Illinois, or, just different places. And they're all here in Louisiana in this environment where they have to interact with each other. And so you've got big city and farm and these different sensibilities.
Can you imagine how unique it was?
Yeah.
And then they're mixing in with the local people who many of them have never met someone from outside the state of Louisiana.
And they don't understand each other. I mean, it's like, how do you pronounce that word? What do you say?
But what's so neat, wonderful friendships were formed that lasted. Many times the soldiers returned after the war with their families to meet with people. People carried on correspondence. There are even several cases of soldiers who were killed in the war that a Louisiana family would still correspond by letter with their next of kin in Vermont or New Hampshire or Illinois. So, what it did, it changed our area of Louisiana. First, it brought us out of the Great Depression. People were able to make money selling things to the soldiers. But also, it opened up our world, where we were such a rural, nearly still a frontier area. And all of a sudden, half of the U.S. Army is here, and they're from Brooklyn, and they're from Los Angeles and Chicago, and they bring in different kinds of music and different beliefs, and it was a true melting pot of my part of Louisiana.
Well, that's just so interesting. And then the music, you said music. I mean, that is also a very strong theme running through this. The old hymns and the blues and just
The Elizabeth's family is autobiographical of my dad's family.
Wow.
And they were all country musicians. I mean, my grandpa would take a handsaw that you saw lumber with, and he would play it with a fiddle bow, and that's in the book.
Yeah.
And they were all fiddlers and guitar players, and I've heard a lot of stories about the soldiers would come gather, and some of them were musicians, and many were just, just curious about it. And then one of my favorite parts, there's several stories in the book about how the soldiers shared their food. especially when they were leaving. You know, the Army's very wasteful.
Yeah.
And when they would pull out to go to another location, they would bury the leftover food.
Crazy.
Invariably, they would go tell neighbors who'd been kind to them where it's at. And people would go dig up cans of all kind of products, bags of sugar, all the things you couldn't get during this time of rationing. And
Yeah.
I have 100 different stories that people still tell me about the relationship between the soldiers and the locals.
Well, I like what you said about all the people in your church that they were like the husbands were from somewhere else and they came
Yeah.
back. I mean, it's like, this is where we're going to stay. You're not going to come
Yeah.
live with my family. We're going to.
Yeah. What's so unique, you know, and I can say it because I'm Louisianian. You know, everyone makes fun of us. And we're number 50 and all the bad things, and number, but people that come here just love it once they get settled here. And I would say in 75% of the cases when these marriages took place, they didn't move back to the husband's country. They stayed in Louisiana. There's just something about it.
It is a beautiful state. I mean, I've never lived there, but I've driven through Louisiana because I drive a lot. And I'm always just, and in Mississippi too, I just think they are two just such pretty states, you know.
And I live in Alexandria, which is close to your name, but a little different.
Close.
We had an air base here that's closed now, and we have a lot of officers that retired here. I'm talking about colonels and generals. And I asked them, I spoke to a group of them recently, why'd you stay here? They said, it's the people. So although Louisiana is beautiful, and yes, we have our problems, we're the most hospitable people in the world. Invariably, these men, whether they married a Louisiana girl or not, a lot of them didn't. They just chose to retire. Of course, we also have a good tax system that doesn't
there you go.
all when they retire.
that helps, yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit more. And I wish I had. I've not yet read As the Crow Flies, but I definitely will be. But I was reading a little bit about this on your website, and you mentioned your great grandfather. But I was really fascinated with the whole Sugar Town and the Confederate Military Road and all of that. And that's part of this series, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, give us a little bit background. Again, this is your family history, and you've taken it and made it into a wonderful novel. So,
when you're writing historical fiction, especially where in my first 3 books, I'm fitting in family stories. The main 2 family characters in my first 3 novels, up to As the Crow Flies, are Joe Moore, who was an Irishman who stowed away and came to Louisiana, and his part Indian wife, Eliza, and they're both buried at Sugartown, Louisiana. Now, Sugartown in the 1800s was called the Jewel of the Frontier. It was one of the larger villages in our part of Louisiana. Had schools, hotels, Masonic Lodge, doctors. And when I wrote this book, the second half of the book takes place in Sugartown. I wanted to write about the glory days of Sugartown because today I call it sad Sugartown. It's just a crossroads. The only time there's any activity is when watermelons come into being. A Sugartown watermelon, you probably haven't heard about, but here in Louisiana, just think the name, a Sugartown watermelon. What it is, our soil is sandy. It's perfect for watermelons. And during watermelon season, Sugartown comes alive, but the rest of the year, it's a ghost town. No post office, no school. And I wanted to write about when they had a male and female boarding school called the Baldwin Academy, 150 students that came from all over Louisiana and East Texas. And I wanted to tell the story of when Sugartown was a town. Now, what happened to Sugartown when the railroads came north and south, they bypassed the town. And that was the death knell for the town. And the first half of the book takes place in a little ghost town called Westport. Now, my ancestor, Joe Moore, the Irishman, he came from Westport, County Mayo, Ireland. What he did, this Confederate military road ran from Alexandria to nearly to the Gulf of Mexico, and it's how they supplied the Confederate Army because New Orleans and Baton Rouge had already been captured. And he built a store. Now, this is 1881. It's after the war. He
Right.
built a store that he named the Westport store after his hometown. And he built it right in the middle of this part Indian group that did not like outsiders. And what happens, these outsiders who are timbermen start coming in and trying to get the land. And the part Indian people, we call them red bones. And it used to be a derisional term, but now our redbone friends have learned you should have pride in whoever you are. I have some friends that on their bumper sticker it says, "I'm proud to be a redbone." But anyway, these redbones did not have any land deeds because the courthouse had burned.
Oh, wow.
The Northern Army burned the courthouse, and they probably didn't have deeds anyway. So
Right.
this feud breaks out basically where Westport is the center of it. And on Christmas Eve, 1881, the feud breaks out into a shooting war. On that day, 4 men are killed. Within a week, my ancestor, his store, and all his outbuildings are burned.
Wow.
And anyone who has any sense that's an outsider moves, they either go back to Alexandria or they move further west. My ancestor, Joe and Eliza, they moved on to Sugartown, about 30 miles on down the Confederate Road. And they opened a store there. And it was run by 3 generations of my family.
Wow.
And that's where one of the Moore daughters married an Iles man. You know, my last name is Iles, and that's how I'm kin. They're all buried at Sugartown, and it's our ancestral home. And so I wanted to make it come back to life. The reason I wanted to tell the story of the Westport fight, there was only, as we knew, one written account of it, and it's only about 5 pages long. But I found in archives at McNeese State University a transcript written by my great aunt who was there at the fight. And so I took those 2 and put them together. They were nearly identical, and used to tell the story of this fight, because if I didn't write this book, the Westport fight was going to be lost to history. And it affects this area. That area of where the Westport fight was, it's still ruled and domiciled by these same part Indian people. Every mailbox has the same last name: Willis, Johnson, Perkins, Doyle. The outsiders still don't live there. Now, they're the most hospitable people in the world, but they don't want any commerce. They don't want any stores. Let me tell you a funny aside. I stopped at one of the houses near Westport, Johnny, and a lady said, "Mr. Iles, people say there ain't no place to eat anywhere here along this road in Westport, but they're wrong. All you got to do is knock on any door and say you're hungry."
Oh,
you know what? That's true.
oh my goodness.
And so I had a lot of fun telling about that culture. And that culture, those sayings, that culture is they're the experts on having all these interesting sayings. And I just have captured them all my life and written them down in my journals. And I love peppering them into the dialogue. I love dialogue.
Yeah, and you're really good at it. And again, I think you just, because of your experience and, having that deep, rich heritage and being part of it. And like you said, even your grandson is a part of that. I think that gives you such a unique advantage. Like you're the one that can tell these stories and make sure they don't get lost, and how important that is.
I think I'm passing it on.
Yeah.
I feel real humbled to be part of that. And when you put it in a book, it'll be here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as I wrote this story, remember, it is historical fiction. Most of the characters are made up.
Sure.
What I did, I chose a female teen. Her name is Missouri Cotton.
I love that name.
Yeah. In fact, that's not her real last name. Her family's always in trouble, so they're changing their names. Her dad's a con artist, and her mom is a faith healer and con artist too. And they're always on the move, and their wagon breaks down in Westport, and that's how she becomes part of the Westport fight. And she tells it. The book is told first person female. And that's a challenge,
That
Johnny.
is, yeah.
I'm a 62-year-old man writing in the voice of a 16-year-old girl. But what I did, I went back and read over and over and over True Grit by Charles Portis.
Wow, yeah.
And watched the movies over and over.
What?
Maddie Ross tells the stories, one of the finest
Yes.
ever written. And Charles Portis is in his 50s when he writes the book, but he makes Maddie Ross come to life. And Missouri Cotton, I feel like we did good. But what's neat, so I was telling you a while ago, this is my first book on Audible. And I hired a West Virginia / South California girl to read it because I couldn't read it.
Sure.
Male voice. Her name is Whitney Ann Jenkins, and she nailed Missouri Cotton.
How fun.
So it's available at Audible. And I'm really pleased with how professional and how she brings the book to life. So
I love that.
what's neat, this book is now, it's in paperback, hardback, ebook, it's in Audible audiobook, and as I told you, it's in Braille.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And that will allow it to, I learned from my years of living in Africa that Braille is still very widely used. You know, when I gave up my rights to the company that produces Braille, I get no royalty on it. I don't want a royalty. I just want the book out there. And so a company called Bookshare. I learned this from a podcast on another one of our independent authors. That she always puts her books on the Braille because it's one more way she can get the word out.
Yeah.
When we believe in what we're writing, we want it out there.
We do, absolutely, because there is there's a wonderful spiritual theme going through. I'll show it one more time. A scent bullet, where Harry really he realizes that this family has something he wants.
He's searching, and he realizes and as you well know, through tragedy in that book, and the tragedy in that book.
Unexpected tragedy. I did not see that coming.
But that's based on a tragedy in my family that happened exactly like that.
Wow.
And, I had some editors tell me that book will never sell with that tragedy. I said, well, tragedies happen.
They do happen.
Good things can come out of tragedy. My family is the example of that. So,
and I loved, and I don't want to do spoilers either, but I loved a few little touches you had after that where the family was at peace because of little tiny things that happened. It's like, so cool.
Johnny, there's a saying, no tears in a writer, no tears in the reader.
Yeah,
I know you know this from writing. Sometimes we write something, we will weep while we write it. And that should be one of the things that it should move us. If what I write doesn't move me, it's not going to move anyone else.
It's not going to move anybody else. I mean, I remember once I was driving to a Bible study, and it's about 45 minutes from my home, and I had never been there before, but I kind of knew where I was going. But I got to thinking about my characters, and this was in Where Treasure Hides, so this book's already actually been, I think it was already even published at the time, or it was coming out or something, so it was written. But I was thinking about them, and I got to crying, and I'm just kind of driving, and I have to stop at a red light, and all of a sudden it's like, I didn't remember where I was going. I wasn't sure where I was, I mean, because my head was just back in World War II with these two people, and I had to sit at that red light and think, where am I going and how do I get there from here?
You were deep involved.
I was deep, it's really great. Well,
but isn't that the joy of writing, is that we become involved. We get to know our characters. And of course, I haven't figured out yet if we write our characters or our characters write us.
Well, they do tend to, and I love it when this happens, they tend to take over and just sort of surprise you with what's
They'll do it every time.
I will. Hey, it's me. I hope you're enjoying this interview with Curt Iles. He is such a fantastic person to talk with. And actually, our interview went on for almost an hour. So I'm breaking it up into 2 parts. You've just finished watching part 1. I invite you to return to see the rest of the interview in part 2. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.